Hi, everybody. This is Jimmy. You're reading with Jimmy. This is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Chapter 7, Analysis. A Mad Tea Party, the first couple of pages of Chapter 7. If you remember, we left off with Alice finishing a conversation with the cat and then going toward the March Hare's house. And remember, too, that we did have a discussion about madness. So this chapter is titled A Mad Tea Party, A Mad Tea Party. And keep in mind that she had gone towards the March Hare's house, but almost wished that she had gone to see the Hatter instead. So chapter 7, which in my original reading I wrote as a good chapter, she reaches the March Hare's house and sees a table outside, and the March Hare and the Hatter are sitting there with the Dormouse in between them, and they're propped up. This is a new character, the Dormouse, and he's sleeping, and they're propped on. They have their elbows on the Dormouse, the March Hare and the Hatter, and they're talking over the Dormouse's head. And Alice observes and thinks, very uncomfortable for the Dormouse. Only as it is asleep, I suppose it doesn't mind. So she's got a little sympathy for the Dormouse being used as a pillow. Then the narrator, not she, but the narrator describes the table. It's a large one, and all three were crowded together on one corner of it. So they're crowded together on one corner of it. And one of them, or all of them, say, "No room, no room." They cry out when they see Alice coming. There's no room. It's a long table. It's a large table. And Alice says indignantly, what is indignantly? In a manner indicating anger or annoyance. What do you mean? There's plenty of room, Alice says. And so she sits down in a large armchair at one end of the table. Now, if you think about this, Alice is always interested in invitation. She's, when she was knocking on the door with the frog and the fish footman, and no one would let her in, she burst in. So, what do you mean there's no room? And so she sits down. She forces herself on that table. Okay? And then the March Hare says, "Have some wine," in an encouraging tone. Encouraging. Have some wine. Alice looks around the table, but there's nothing on it but tea. And she says, "I don't see any wine." And the March Hare says, "There isn't any." Then it wasn't very civil of you to offer it, said Alice angrily. Now she's angry. You can see from this moment on, the title of the chapter is A Mad Tea Party. Something's going on here, right? Right? The March Hare says, "Have some wine." And she says, "I don't see any." Well, there isn't any. Not the usual greeting, is it? In any case, then it wasn't very civil of you to offer. Well, it wasn't very civil of you to sit down without being invited, said the March Hare. And that's the truth, isn't it? "I didn't know it was your table," said Alice. "It's laid for a great many more than three." Well, that's an interesting comment, isn't it? She's at the March Hare's house. It's not only the March Hare, but it's the March Hare, Hatter, and Dormouse. It's a big table. There's only three people at the table, but she's arguing. Remember, arguments are a big part of this. Conversations are a big part of this. "I didn't know it was your table. It's laid for many more people." And then the Hatter speaks up. Finally, we hear from the Hatter. "Your hair wants cutting," said the Hatter. He'd been looking at Alice for some time with great curiosity, and this was his first speech. "Your hair wants cut. You need to cut your hair." "You should learn not to make personal remarks," Alice said with some severity. "It's very rude." And then the Hatter opened his eyes very wide on hearing this. What? But all he said was, "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" Come, come, we shall have some fun now, thought Alice. I wrote a note on the margin. Remember, she thinks and then she speaks out loud. It's important to think before you speak, ladies and gentlemen, isn't it? Well, I'm glad they began asking riddles. I believe I can guess that, she added aloud. So she thinks first and says, oh, we're going to have some fun now. There's going to be riddles. And she says, I think I can guess it. And that March Hare says, do you mean that you think you can find out the answer to it? Exactly, said Alice. Well, then you should say what you mean, said the March Hare. This is very important to our discussion because saying what you mean and meaning what you say is going to be part of the next discussion. But we can tell right now that there's going to be a little weirdness at this little tea party with the March Hare and the Hatter and the Dormouse who's sleeping. And one of the things is guessing the same thing as finding the answer. We're going to find out in a minute. And is the March Hare right in correcting Alice? Well, I think he is. In any case, I wanted to bring your attention to senses, the human senses, because she says, I don't see any wine. I don't see any wine on the table. And he says, because there isn't any. Well, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But we get our information from our senses. Now, most people, usually when we think of senses, we have 5 senses, right? Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. And if you Google how many senses do you have, you're going to find out that some people now think we have 53 senses. Well, or at least 9. People like to chop things up into different degrees. Well, Jimmy's here to tell you that you have 5 senses and that you could say, well, what about my sense of balance? If you didn't have those 5 senses, you would not have a sense of balance and you wouldn't have a sense of pain. All the other senses come to you. Everything you know comes to you through your 5 portals. You got 5 portals. You got your eyes, you got your ears, you got your nose, you got your taste, your tongue, and you touch your hands, you touch, your body touches. So we can argue all we want. I have 53. No, I have 9. No, I have 14. You've got 5. Human beings have 5. And some people are, more attuned. They always say a dog's sense of smell is better than ours. I don't know, because I'm not a dog. But for our purposes, we want to keep these in mind as we go through Wonderland, because we've been watching Alice's senses take in a great deal of information. The Cheshire Cat who vanishes, things being thrown at the Duchess, the Dormouse, her ability to shrink and to grow taller. So keep this in mind as we go. You're reading with Jimmy. This is Chapter 7, A Mad Tea Party. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com is my email. Please send me an email. Look forward to seeing you for the next couple of pages in the analysis. Thanks for listening.